The Velthari had watched the stars for 12,000 years. They were old, they were powerful, and they had never lost a war. Their bodies were made of living crystal, tall and beautiful in a cold way. They spoke to each other through music and vibrations that rang through the air like bells. To them, the universe was a garden, and they were the gardeners. Every species they found was either a flower to be collected or a weed to be pulled. In all their long history, they had discovered 43 intelligent species among the stars. 39 of those species no longer existed. The Velthari had decided they were not useful, and so they had ended them. The remaining four served the hegemony as slaves, their spirits broken centuries ago. This was the natural order of things. The strong ruled. The weak served or died. The Velthari saw no cruelty in this. It was simply how the universe worked. When their long-range sensors detected radio signals coming from a small yellow star at the edge of the galaxy, no one was excited. It happened every few centuries. Some primitive species would discover electricity, start broadcasting into space, and the Velthari would add them to the collection. Scout Commander Naros was given the task of observation. He took his vessel to the distant system and hid in the shadow of the eighth planet, a blue giant of ice and storms. From there, his sensors could see everything. The third planet from the star was the source of the signals. It was a small world, covered mostly in water, with patches of green and brown land. Naros watched it for 6 months. He intercepted their communications. He studied their languages. He observed their cities from orbit. What he found was almost boring in its familiarity. The species called themselves humans. They were soft creatures made of meat and bone, fragile things that lived for less than a century. They had only recently discovered how to split the atom. They had only recently left their own atmosphere. They were babies taking their first steps, and they were constantly fighting each other. Naros watched their wars with a mixture of amusement and disgust. They killed each other over invisible lines drawn on maps. They argued about whose imaginary gods were real. They poisoned their own air and water in pursuit of resources they would exhaust in generations. He compiled his report with growing confidence. This species was no threat. They could barely reach their own moon. Their weapons were primitive chemical explosives and radioactive materials. Their fastest ships would take years to reach even the nearest star. The Velthari could harvest this world in their sleep. The High Resonance Council received his report and made their decision in less than a day. The planet Earth was classified as a harvesting target. The humans would be collected for study and labor. Their world would be stripped of useful resources. It was the same fate that had befallen dozens of species before them. Fleet Commander Varos was given 200 warships for the mission. It was far more than necessary, but the Velthari believed in overwhelming force. Why risk anything when you could guarantee victory? The fleet departed from the great shipyards of Velthara Prime, crystal vessels that gleamed like jewels against the darkness of space. Each ship was kilometers long, powered by captured singularities, armed with weapons that could crack planets. They were beautiful and terrible, monuments to Velthari superiority. Varos spent the journey reviewing the intelligence on humanity. He found them interesting in a clinical way, like a scientist studying insects. Their history was a catalog of violence and self-destruction. They had come close to ending themselves several times with their nuclear weapons. They seemed incapable of cooperation for more than a few decades at a time, and yet they had survived. Against all logic, they had crawled out of their caves, built their cities, and reached for the stars. It was almost admirable, in a pathetic sort of way. The fleet commander felt something close to pity. These creatures would never know what they might have become. They would never spread beyond their single world, never join the galactic community, never fulfill whatever potential they might have had. They had simply been unlucky enough to be discovered by the Velthari before they were ready. Such was the fate of the week. The fleet entered the human solar system on a cold morning in January, though the humans had no way of knowing it. They slipped past the outer planets like ghosts, silent and invisible. Velthari's stealth technology was perfect. No human instrument could detect them. Varos positioned his fleet in orbit around the fourth planet, the red one the humans called Mars. From there, they began their final observations. The humans had grown slightly since the last report. They had more satellites now, more stations in orbit. They had sent more robots to explore their system. But none of it mattered. They were still primitive. They were still helpless. The broadcast was prepared according to ancient tradition. The Velthari would announce themselves, demand surrender, and begin harvesting. Any resistance would be crushed. Any defiance would be punished. This was how it had always been done. But before sending the message, Keth Varos made a curious decision. He ordered his communications officer to compile all the human entertainment they had intercepted. He wanted to understand these creatures better, to know them before he destroyed them. The officer worked through the night, sorting through thousands of hours of human broadcasts, music and news and sports and drama, and something else. Something the Veltari had never encountered before. Thousands and thousands of stories about war with alien invaders. Keth Varos watched some of them with growing confusion. In these stories, humans fought against impossible odds. They faced enemies with superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. And somehow, against all logic, the humans won. The stories were absurd. Humans defeating advanced aliens with computer viruses. Humans destroying massive warships with primitive fighters. Humans surviving extinction through sheer determination. None of it made any sense. The communications officer made a small sound of amusement, a chiming note that echoed through the command chamber. They dream of resistance, she said. They imagine themselves as warriors against the stars. How sad, how pathetic. Keth Varos agreed. It was pathetic. These soft creatures, trapped on their single world, fantasizing about battles they could never win. They had no idea what real power looked like. They had no concept of what was coming for them. He ordered the broadcast sent. The message appeared on every screen on Earth, every television, every computer, every phone. It cut through all frequencies, all channels, all networks. The face of Keth Varos, crystalline and alien, looked down at 8 billion humans and spoke in every one of their languages at once. People of Earth, we are the Velthari hegemony. Your world has been selected for harvesting. You will surrender your governments, your resources, and yourselves to our authority. Resistance is inefficient. Compliance will be rewarded with swift processing. You have one planetary rotation to respond. Then the message ended and the screens went dark. Keth Varos settled back in his command chair and waited. He had done this many times before. First would come the panic, then the prayers, then the desperate, futile attempts at communication, and finally the surrender. It always went the same way. But far below, on the blue-green world called Earth, something was happening that Keth Varos did not expect. Something that had never happened before in all the long history of Velthari conquest. Humanity was not panicking. Humanity was getting angry. And in military bases and government bunkers all around the world, men and women who had grown up watching those same science fiction stories were looking at each other with the same thought in their minds. They had been preparing for this their entire lives. They just had not known it until now. The first 24 hours after the Velthari broadcast were the strangest in human history. There was chaos, of course. People ran through the streets screaming. Religious leaders declared the end times. Stock markets crashed to zero. Some people locked themselves in bunkers. Others threw parties, deciding to enjoy their final hours. But underneath the chaos, something else was happening. Something quiet, something powerful. Enemies stopped fighting. In the Middle East, soldiers who had been shooting at each other that morning put down their weapons and stared at the sky. In Asia, nations that had threatened nuclear war began sharing intelligence. In Europe and America and Africa and everywhere else, old hatreds suddenly seemed very small compared to what was coming. The United Nations held an emergency session that lasted 18 hours. Every nation sent representatives. Every voice was heard. And when it was over, they had done something that most people believed was impossible. They had agreed, not on everything, not perfectly, but on the one thing that mattered: humanity would not surrender. Humanity would fight, and humanity would fight together. The response to the Velthari was broadcast exactly 23 hours after their ultimatum. A Swedish diplomat named Anna Lindberg was chosen to deliver it because she was calm and precise and showed no fear. She looked into the camera and spoke clearly. To the Velthari hegemony, we have received your message and considered your demands. We reject them. Earth will not surrender. We will not submit to harvesting. We will resist you with every weapon we possess and every life we have. However, we are prepared to offer you an alternative." She paused and smiled slightly. "Leave now, and we will permit you to do so unharmed. This is our only offer. You have one planetary rotation to respond." Then the broadcast ended. Aboard his flagship, Fleet Commander Keith Varos stared at the screen in silence. His officers exchanged confused looks. This had never happened before. No species had ever responded to a Velthari ultimatum with a threat of their own. It was so absurd that Keith Varos actually laughed. The sound rang through the command chamber like breaking glass. "They threaten us," he said. "These creatures who cannot even leave their own solar system threaten the hegemony. How wonderful! How amusing!" His officers laughed with him. The idea was ridiculous. Human weapons could not penetrate Velthari shields. Human ships could not catch Velthari vessels. The humans were fish threatening to drown an ocean. Keth Varos gave the order to begin harvesting operations. There was no point in waiting any longer. The humans had made their choice, and now they would suffer the consequences. 20 harvester ships descended toward Earth. Each one was massive, designed to strip resources from entire continents. They landed in remote areas where human population was thin. The Australian outback, the Siberian wilderness, the Sahara Desert, the Amazon rainforest. The ships touched down and deployed their collection drones. Thousands of machines spread out across the landscape, designed to gather minerals and water and organic material. They had done this on dozens of worlds before. But then something strange happened. The ships stopped reporting. One by one, their signals went dead. Communications officers tried to re-establish contact. Sensors showed nothing unusual, but the ships were silent. Keth Varos felt the first small twinge of concern. Not fear, not yet. Just confusion. Perhaps there was some interference with their communications. Perhaps there was a malfunction. He ordered a reconnaissance drone to the Australian landing site. The small craft descended through the atmosphere and approached the location of the harvester ship. What it found made no sense. The ship was destroyed. A kilometer of crystal and light reduced to shattered pieces scattered across the red earth. Smoke rose from the wreckage. Fires burned in the debris. And walking among the ruins were human soldiers. They wore strange suits and carried weapons that Keth Varos did not recognize. They were collecting pieces of the ship, loading them onto trucks. They were smiling. One of them looked up at the drone directly into its camera. He raised his weapon and fired. The feed went dead. Keth Varos stood frozen in his command chamber. His officers were silent. No one knew what to say. "How?" someone finally asked. "Their weapons cannot damage our shields. Their explosives cannot penetrate our armor. How did they destroy a harvester?" No one had an answer. Reports began coming in from the other landing sites. Every harvester had been destroyed. Not damaged, not captured. Destroyed. 20 ships, each one worth more than most human cities, reduced to wreckage in less than 2 hours. Keith Varos ordered his fleet to high alert. He dispatched warships to Earth orbit. If the humans wanted a fight, he would give them one. He would burn their cities until they begged for mercy. But when his warships arrived, they found something unexpected. The humans had weapons in orbit. Not many, not powerful by Velthari standards. But there, satellites armed with nuclear missiles, kinetic projectiles, things that should not have been possible for such a primitive species. The first human missiles were laughable. They detonated against Velthari shields without effect. The crystalline warships barely noticed them. But then came the second wave, and these missiles were different. They penetrated the shields. One Velthari cruiser exploded without warning, then another. The ships had no time to react, no time to understand what was happening. Human weapons that should have been harmless were suddenly deadly. Keth Varos watched in horror as his fleet suffered losses, real losses, something that had not happened in Velthari memory. "Fall back," he ordered. "All ships fall back to Mars orbit. Now." The fleet retreated. Behind them, the blue-green world of Earth hung in space, unconquered, unbroken. In the days that followed, Velthari scientists studied the wreckage of their fallen ships. They analyzed the weapons that had destroyed them, and slowly they began to understand what had happened. The humans had adapted. In the 3 months since the first Velthari scouts had been detected, humanity had done the impossible. They had captured pieces of Velthari technology. They had reverse engineered it. They had built weapons specifically designed to defeat Velthari shields. 3 months. It had taken the Velthari centuries to develop that shield technology. Humans had broken it in 3 months. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the scientist who led the project. She worked in a secret facility in Mexico with a team from 12 different countries. They slept 4 hours a night. They ate at their desks. They pushed themselves beyond exhaustion. When someone asked her how they had done it so fast, she laughed. Do you know how long it took humans to go from the first airplane to landing on the moon? 66 years. From the first computer to a supercomputer in every pocket? 50 years. We are very, very good at doing impossible things when our survival depends on it. The Velthari did not understand this. They could not understand it. Their species changed slowly over millennia. The idea that a species could transform so quickly was beyond their experience. Keth Varos sent a message to the High Resonance Council on Velthara Prime. His report was simple and devastating. The humans have exceeded all predictions. They have destroyed 20 harvester ships and damaged 17 warships. They have weapons we did not anticipate. They have shown no signs of surrender. I am requesting reinforcements. The Council's response came within days. They were sending more ships, many more ships. The humans had humiliated the hegemony, and that could not stand. But as Keth Varos waited for reinforcements, he found himself watching the human broadcasts again. Not the science fiction this time. The news, the speeches, the ordinary people talking about the war. They were not afraid. They were angry. They were determined. They were building weapons and training soldiers and preparing to fight. They truly believed they could win. It was insane. They were one small species on one small world facing the greatest power in the galaxy. They should be begging for mercy. Instead, they were promising to destroy the hegemony. For the first time in his long life, Keth Varos felt something cold settle in his crystalline heart. It was not fear, he told himself. The Velthari did not feel fear, but it was something very close to it. 6 weeks into the war, the Velthari began to understand what they were truly fighting. It was not a species. It was not an army. It was something far more dangerous. It was stubbornness given form. It was rage made into flesh and bone. It was 10,000 years of human history, all the wars and famines and plagues and disasters distilled into a single burning purpose. Humanity would not die. Fleet Commander Keth Varos had received his reinforcements. 300 more warships, fresh from the core worlds, crewed by veterans who had crushed rebellions and conquered planets. They joined his remaining fleet and descended on Earth with overwhelming force. The battle for Earth's orbit lasted 9 days. The Velthari should have won. They had more ships, better weapons, centuries more experience. But somehow, impossibly, they did not win. Human ships rose from the surface to meet them. Ugly things, crude and primitive, built in secret facilities around the world. They were slower than Velthari vessels. Their shields were weaker. Their weapons were less precise. But their pilots were insane. Captain Yuki Tanaka flew a converted cargo shuttle armed with nuclear missiles. She had been a commercial pilot before the war. Now she led a squadron of 12 similar ships into the heart of the Velthari fleet. She knew she was going to die. They all knew. But they went anyway. Her squadron took down 3 Velthari cruisers before they were destroyed. 3 cruisers for 12 shuttles. It was an absurd exchange rate. It should have been impossible. But that was how humans fought. They traded their lives for enemy kills without hesitation. They flew into certain death with smiles on their faces. They made the Velthari pay for every inch of space with blood and fire. Keth Varos could not understand it. No species behaved this way. When death was certain, rational beings surrendered. They preserved themselves. They accepted defeat. Humans did not. On the ground, the war was even stranger. Sergeant Major James Okonkwo of the Nigerian Army led guerrilla operations across 3 continents. He had fought in half a dozen African conflicts before the Velthari arrived. He knew how to fight enemies with superior weapons. He knew how to make the strong fear the weak. His tactics were simple and brutal. Strike fast, strike hard, vanish before the enemy can respond. The Veltari could not find him. Their sensors could track their own technology, but human soldiers used almost nothing the Veltari could detect. They communicated with hand signals and written messages. They moved through tunnels and sewers and forests. They attacked from nowhere and disappeared into nothing. Okonkwo taught his methods to soldiers from every nation. Americans learned from Chinese. Russians trained with Brazilians. The old borders meant nothing now. They were all human, and humans protected their own. The Velthari responded with overwhelming force. They burned entire regions from orbit. They sent ground troops in massive numbers. They used every weapon in their arsenal. Nothing worked. When they burned a city, the humans moved to another city. When they killed 1,000 soldiers, 10,000 more appeared. When they destroyed a base, 3 new bases were built. The humans were like water. They could not be held. They could not be stopped. They flowed around every obstacle and wore down every defense. And they learned. Every Velthari weapon they captured was studied. Every piece of Velthari armor was analyzed. Every bit of Velthari technology was understood and improved and turned against its makers. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked without sleep. Her team had grown to thousands of scientists from every nation on Earth. They made breakthroughs that should have taken decades and days. They built weapons that should have been impossible in weeks. The Velthari think we are stupid because we are young, she told a reporter. They do not understand. We are not young. We are fast. There is a difference. She explained it simply. The Velthari had been the dominant species in their region of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had no competitors, no threats, no reason to improve. They had grown slow and comfortable and arrogant. Humans had never known comfort. Every generation faced new challenges. Every century brought new wars. They had been forced to adapt and improve and innovate constantly, just to survive. The Velthari were old. Humans were hungry, and hungry always beat old. The war entered its second month, and the Velthari began to notice something disturbing. Their soldiers were becoming afraid. It was a small thing at first. Hesitation before entering human territory. Reluctance to pursue retreating enemies. A growing sense that something terrible was waiting just out of sight. Then the stories began to spread. Stories of Velthari patrols that vanished without trace. Stories of ships destroyed by weapons that appeared from nowhere. Stories of human soldiers who kept fighting even when they should have been dead. One story in particular spread through the fleet like a disease. A Velthari commander had captured a human soldier in South America. He was just a boy, really, barely old enough to fight. The commander tried to interrogate him, to learn about human defenses and weapons. The boy had laughed. "You have already lost," he said. "You just do not know it yet." The commander had been confused. "We have destroyed your cities. We have killed millions of your people. How have we lost?" The boy smiled. His teeth were red with blood. "Because we will never stop. You can kill every human on this planet, and the last one standing will still try to take you with them. We do not surrender. We do not give up. We just get angrier." He died without revealing anything useful, but the story spread anyway, and with it came a question that haunted every Velthari soldier. What kind of species was this? Keth Varos asked himself that question every day. He had conquered 12 worlds in his career. He had broken the resistance of species far more advanced than humanity. But he had never faced anything like this. The humans did not fight like a civilized species. They fought like animals. No, worse than animals. Animals understood when they were beaten. Animals ran from superior predators. Humans attacked superior predators with rocks and sticks and refused to stop until one of them was dead. At the end of the 6th week, Keth Varos received a report that changed everything. Human ships had been detected leaving Earth orbit. Not many, just a dozen small vessels. But they were not fleeing. They were heading toward Mars, toward the Velthari fleet. "They are attacking us," his sensor officer said in disbelief. 12 ships against 500. They are actually attacking us. Keth Varos watched the human ships approach. They were faster than before, better armed. The humans were improving with every battle. "Launch interceptors," he ordered. "Destroy them before they reach the fleet." But as his interceptors moved to engage, more human ships appeared. Then more. Then more. They had been hiding, building in secret, waiting. 60 human ships charged at the Velthari fleet with weapons blazing. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned. But they did not care. The Battle of Mars orbit was the bloodiest engagement of the war. When it was over, the Velthari had lost 80 ships. The humans had lost 42. Keth Varos stared at the casualty reports in shock. The humans had actually won. Not just survived, but won. They had destroyed almost twice as many ships as they had lost. It was impossible. It was madness. But it was also the truth. The humans were not just fighting anymore. They were winning. And somewhere in the ruins of his fleet, Keth Varos realized that he might actually lose this war. The thought was terrifying. The thought was unthinkable, but it was also true. 3 months after the first Velthari broadcast, humanity went on the offensive. It was a moment that changed galactic history. A species that had never left its own solar system launched an attack on the greatest military power known to exist. It was foolish. It was reckless. It was exactly what humans did best. Admiral Chen Wei-lin stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and looked at her fleet. 200 ships built in secret on the dark side of the moon. They were ugly vessels welded together from human engineering and stolen Velthari technology. They looked like something a child might build from scrap metal, but they worked. And they were deadly. Chen had been a Chinese naval officer before the war. She had spent her career preparing for conflicts that never came, fighting enemies that never appeared. Now she was leading humanity's first interstellar fleet into battle against alien invaders. She thought it was exactly what she had been born to do. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her communications officer said. "The fleet is yours." Chen nodded. She pressed the button that connected her to every ship in the formation. "Soldiers of Earth, today we take the war to the enemy. For 3 months we have defended our home. We have bled and died and refused to surrender. But defense is not enough. Today, we attack." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The Velthari believe they are the masters of the galaxy. They believe we are primitives, animals, cattle to be harvested. Today, we show them what primitives can do. Today, we teach them fear." The fleet accelerated toward the Velthari positions around Mars. 200 human ships against the remaining 400 enemy vessels. The odds were not good, but humans had never cared much about odds. The battle began at maximum range. Human missiles streaked through space, targeted at Velthari power systems and weapon arrays. The Velthari fired back with energy beams that could cut through mountains. Ships died on both sides. Explosions lit up the darkness between worlds. Metal and crystal scattered into the void. Chen fought her fleet like no Velthari commander had ever seen. She used tricks from human naval history that were thousands of years old. She sent decoy ships to draw enemy fire. She hid attack groups behind asteroids. She sacrificed wounded vessels to create openings for killing blows. The Velthari could not predict her. They could not understand her tactics. Their war computers were designed for enemies who fought logically, efficiently, predictably. Humans were none of those things. Captain Marcus Johnson commanded the destroyer Swift Vengeance. His ship was badly damaged, engines failing, weapons running dry. By any reasonable measure, he should have retreated. Instead, he accelerated directly at a Velthari battleship 10 times his size. "All hands, prepare for impact," he said calmly. "It has been an honor serving with you." The Swift Vengeance struck the enemy battleship at full speed. Both vessels exploded together. It was madness. It was suicide. And it won the battle. The Velthari fleet, seeing their largest ship destroyed by a dying human vessel, lost their nerve. For the first time in their history, they broke formation and ran. Admiral Chen did not let them escape. Human ships pursued the fleeing Velthari across the solar system. They hunted them like wolves chasing deer. They destroyed transport vessels and supply ships. They cut off escape routes and forced surrenders. When the battle was over, 300 Velthari ships had been destroyed or captured. The human fleet had lost 90 vessels. It was a victory beyond anything humanity had dared to hope for. News of the battle spread across Earth in hours. People danced in the streets. Soldiers wept with joy. The impossible had happened. Humanity had won a real battle against the Velthari. But Chen knew the war was not over. The hegemony had thousands more ships. They would send another fleet, larger than before, and another after that. If humanity wanted to survive, they needed to do more than defend. They needed to attack the hegemony itself. 2 weeks later, the Velthari sent a diplomat. Her name was Shen Korra, and she was old even by Velthari standards. She had negotiated the surrender of 12 species. She had never failed. She met with human representatives on Earth's moon in a sealed chamber that neither side fully trusted. The lead human negotiator was a Brazilian woman named Ambassador Maria Silva. She was small and quiet and had the coldest eyes Shen Korra had ever seen. "The hegemony offers terms," Shen Korra began. "We will withdraw our forces from your inner system. We will take only the outer planets, the gas giants, and their moons. Your world will be left in peace for 100 years. After that time, we will reassess our relationship." She believed it was a generous offer. No species had ever been given such terms. The Velthari were essentially admitting that humans had fought well enough to earn a pause. Ambassador Silva listened politely. Then she laughed. "I am afraid you misunderstand the situation," she said. "We are not negotiating for peace. We are negotiating the terms of your surrender." Shen Korra's crystalline face could not show expression, but her voice wavered with shock. "Our surrender? You cannot be serious. Even if you defeat every ship in this system, the hegemony will send 100 more. 1,000. You cannot win." Silva smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "We are counting on it." The negotiations collapsed. Shen Korra returned to the fleet with nothing. But as she traveled back to her ship, something strange happened. Her vessel intercepted a human transmission. It was not encrypted. It was not hidden. It was broadcast openly for anyone to hear. It contained star maps of Velthari space, detailed information about fleet deployments, supply routes and patrol schedules, the locations of every major Velthari military base within 100 light years. The humans had been watching them, studying them, learning everything about the hegemony's defenses, and now they were sharing that information with the entire galaxy. Shen Korra understood then what the humans were planning. They were not just fighting to defend their world. They were not just trying to survive. They were planning to conquer. She rushed to Commander Keith Varos with her discovery. She showed him the transmissions, the star maps, the detailed intelligence. "They know everything about us," she said, "and they are telling everyone. Every enslaved species, every conquered world. They are telling them that the Velthari can be beaten." Keith Varos stared at the data in horror. He understood the implications immediately. The hegemony had ruled through fear. Their subjects obeyed because they believed resistance was impossible. But if they saw the Velthari losing, if they saw a primitive species defeating the masters of the galaxy, "They are starting a revolution," he whispered. "They are not just fighting us. They are trying to destroy everything we have built." Shen Korra nodded. "These humans are more dangerous than we ever imagined. They do not think like us. They do not fight for resources or territory. They fight for something else." "What?" "Pride," she said. "Anger. Revenge. They are going to tear down the hegemony because we dared to threaten them, because we called them primitive, because we tried to harvest them like animals." Keith Varos remembered the boy soldier in South America, the one who had laughed at death. He remembered the captain who had crashed his ship into a battleship. He remembered every impossible thing the humans had done. "Can we stop them?" he asked. Shen Korra was silent for a long moment. "I do not know," she finally said. "I have negotiated with dozens of species. I have seen every kind of enemy the galaxy has to offer. But I have never seen anything like humanity." She paused. "They are not afraid of us. They are not afraid of death. They are not afraid of anything. And I do not know how to defeat an enemy that does not know fear." Far away on the blue-green world called Earth, Admiral Chen Wei-lin was already planning the next battle. Human ships were being built faster than ever. Human soldiers were being trained by the millions. Human scientists were developing weapons that made the Velthari look primitive. The war was just beginning, and humanity was hungry for victory. 1 year after the Velthari first appeared in Earth's sky, the war came to their homeworld. The hegemony was burning. Across 100 light-years, enslaved species were rising against their masters. Worlds that had been silent for centuries were suddenly screaming for freedom. The careful order that the Velthari had built over 12,000 years was collapsing, and at the center of it all was humanity. The human fleet had grown beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. 3,000 ships, crewed by humans and aliens alike, species that had been conquered and broken, and who now found hope in the most unexpected place. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of the dreadnought unconquered and watched Velthara Prime grow larger on her screens. The crystalline homeworld of the hegemony, beautiful and ancient, the seat of power for the masters of the stars. Today, it would fall. The Velthari had gathered everything they had left for this final defense. 2,000 warships, the greatest concentration of military power in their history. They knew that if they lost here, they lost everything. Chen was not worried. She had spent the past year learning how the Velthari thought. She understood their strategies, their weaknesses, their fears, and she knew their greatest weakness of all. They still believed they were superior. Even now, after losing battle after battle, they could not accept that a primitive species had outfought them. They believed this was a temporary setback. They believed that their technology, their experience, their ancient wisdom would triumph in the end. They were wrong. Chen opened communications to her fleet. 3,000 ships, millions of soldiers, the greatest military force humanity had ever assembled. They had come so far, lost so much, and now they stood at the gates of their enemy's home. Soldiers of humanity, she said, and soldiers of all the free species of the galaxy. 1 year ago, the Velthari came to our world. They called us primitives. They called us vermin. They came to harvest us like cattle. She paused. Her voice was calm and cold. Today, we show them what happens to those who threaten humanity. Today, we show the galaxy that the age of the Velthari is over, and the age of humanity has begun. The battle for Velthara Prime was the largest in galactic history. Ships clashed in the darkness above the crystal world. Energy beams and missiles and kinetic projectiles filled space with fire. Vessels exploded by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The void itself seemed to burn. The Velthari fought with desperation. They knew this was the end. They threw everything they had at the human fleet, every ship, every weapon, every soldier. They fought like beings with nothing to lose. But humanity had learned from 1,000 wars. They had tactics the Velthari had never imagined. They had weapons that should have been impossible. And they had something else, something the Velthari could never match. They had allies. The Keth were an insect species that the Velthari had enslaved 6,000 years ago. They had been used as laborers, builders, disposable workers for the hegemony. Now they piloted their own warships, fighting alongside humans with bitter joy. The Sora were telepaths who had been kept in cages for their mental abilities. Now they coordinated battle communications across the entire human fleet, linking minds across the vastness of space. The Threks were warriors who had been conquered and humiliated and forced to serve as palace guards. Now they led boarding parties onto Velthari vessels, fighting with ancient weapons that their masters had thought were only ceremonial. 12 species, all former slaves of the hegemony, fought beside humanity that day. They had been told for centuries that they could never be free. They had believed it. Then they had seen humans fight. They had seen a species with primitive technology and no experience stand against the Velthari and win. They had seen that the masters could be defeated, and they had remembered how to hope. Commander Keth Varos watched his fleet die. Ship after ship fell to human weapons. Defense lines collapsed. Retreat routes were cut off. He had been a commander for 300 years. He had never lost a battle. Now he was losing everything. His flagship shuddered as human missiles struck its shields. Warning sounds filled the command chamber. Officers reported casualties and damage and failures across every system. "Commander," his sensor officer said quietly, "the orbital defenses have fallen. Human landing craft are descending to the surface. They are targeting the capital." Keth Varos closed his eyes. The capital, the great crystal spires where the High Resonance Council ruled, the heart of the hegemony. Humanity was coming for the throne. He gave the order to surrender. The fighting stopped slowly. Weapons fell silent. Ships powered down. Across the Velthari fleet, officers who had never known defeat accepted the impossible truth. They had lost. Admiral Chen accepted the surrender personally. She stood in the great council chamber of Velthara Prime, surrounded by the crystalline beauty of 12,000 years of Velthari civilization. The High Resonance Council knelt before her, their proud forms bent in submission. She felt nothing. No triumph, no joy, only a cold satisfaction that the job was done. The terms are simple, she said. The hegemony is dissolved. All enslaved species are freed immediately. The Velthari military is disbanded. You will keep your homeworld and your lives. Everything else is forfeit. The council accepted. They had no choice. As the treaty was signed, a young Velthari scholar approached the human delegation. Her name was Lithsera, and she had spent her life studying the species the hegemony had conquered. She had watched humanity with growing fascination and fear. Now she had to understand. How? She asked Ambassador Silva, who stood beside Admiral Chen. You were nothing. You had nothing. You had no ships, no weapons, no experience. How did you defeat us? Silva looked at her for a long moment. The ambassador was old now, scarred by a year of war, but her eyes were still cold and hard. You studied us for years before you attacked, she said. You saw our wars. You saw our pollution. You saw our cruelty to each other. You thought those were weaknesses. You thought they made us easy prey. She shook her head slowly. You never understood. Every war we fought taught us something. Every disaster we survived made us stronger. Every failure taught us how to succeed. We have been preparing for a fight like this since we crawled out of the caves. She leaned closer to the young Velthari. You saw us killing each other and thought we were weak. You never realized we were practicing. Lithsera stepped back, finally understanding. The humans were not strong despite their violent history. They were strong because of it. Every generation of conflict had forged them into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. The Velthari had lived in peace for 12,000 years. They had grown soft and slow and comfortable. The humans had never stopped fighting, and when a real enemy finally appeared, they were ready. 6 months later, the reconstruction began. The galaxy was changing. The old hegemony was gone, replaced by a new alliance led by humanity. Species that had been slaves were now partners. Worlds that had been silent were now free. Ambassador Silva stood on a balcony overlooking the new capital, a space station built between Earth and Mars. Ships from 100 worlds passed by, carrying trade and diplomats and hope. A reporter asked her what came next for humanity. She smiled. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other, she said. Now we have the stars. We will explore them. We will build new worlds. We will make alliances and discoveries and mistakes. We will be human, as we have always been. She looked out at the ships passing by, carrying the future of a galaxy. The Velthari thought they were the masters of the universe. They learned what happens when you threaten humanity. Now everyone knows. She turned back to the reporter. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the smartest. We are not the oldest or the wisest. But we are the most stubborn. We never give up. We never stop. And we never ever forget those who hurt us. She looked toward the stars that humanity would claim. They never saw us coming, and now the galaxy belongs to us all. Far away on a crystal world that had once ruled the stars, an old Velthari commander sat alone in his quarters. Keth Veros had been stripped of rank and power. He was a prisoner in all but name. He spent his days studying human history, trying to understand the species that had destroyed everything he had known. He watched their movies and read their books and listened to their music. And slowly he began to understand. The humans had never been primitives. They had been survivors. Every challenge they faced, every disaster they endured, every war they fought had made them more dangerous. They were a species forged in fire, tested by hardship, strengthened by struggle. The Velthari had looked at humanity and seen weakness. They had been blind. Keith Veros closed his eyes and accepted the truth. The humans were never going to lose. From the very beginning, they had been the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They had just been waiting for someone to prove it.